Okay, hello everyone. Welcome to our podcast. This podcast is called Literary Legends, where we kind of explore famous playwrights, famous stories, and this will be our first episode, so we're excited. My name is Mariana,
I'm Anais.
and today we're going to be discussing Othello. And just to give you guys a little bit of a background on each of us, I'm currently a senior majoring in English in secondary education.
I am actually a nursing major with a minor in theology.
Sure. So we have two very different perspectives, but I'm kind of excited about this. Because I definitely think that out of all the plays we discussed, I would definitely say that Othello was the one that, stood out the most to me, that I kept wanting to go back to, even as we explored other types of plays. So what kind of drew you to Othello as well?
I think there's just a lot to unpack in Othello. Obviously there's like the talk about race and everything, but I mean, Othello's really one of like the only plays from this time period where there's like a black man, and not only just a black man as like a hero, but there was like a black man and he was like in a position of power. He had a white wife, and those were all very controversial things. Even to this day, you still have people, that still have issues with this. So I think it's just the fact that we can keep relating it to our society today is what's really interesting to me.
Of course. And you touched on one thing that I think is so important, but like the fact that Othello is a black man, or even if you want to call him a Moor, and go back to this idea that like, oh, that's like Middle Eastern, that's brown but not technically black or whatever. I feel like people kind of like they kind of try to minimize the impact of being a Moor in this play. Like I wouldn't be comfortable going into an Othello play and seeing like a white guy play Othello.
Oh no, that takes
Right?
away the whole thing of it, like then you just lose that whole aspect, like that huge chunk of it. Yeah.
Definitely. It feels like that entire like richness, that entire like facet that you were talking about gets completely removed. And if anything, I think that would make the play irreversibly weaker than it is.
Yeah, definitely. And I feel like there's just like, especially because in England at that time, it was just, they had Catholics and Protestants, that was it. But there was other religions and it did have impacts in their society, obviously. So I just think that's interesting that I'm happy that he did write. Like there were like a few references that I noticed in the play. There were some like references to like Islam in the play, because obviously Othello is a Moor, and he was I think he was converted, he converted, but he was still raised with those practices, and I think that's where he gets that big sense of honor. Honor in Islam is so important. So, you have references to things like the moon in Othello, like especially that scene where he's about to kill Desdemona. He references to the moon and how the moon should turn away and just things like that. And those are big symbols in this one. Yeah, I mean, definitely like not a lot, but there was still like honor killings. I mean, man, I was reading some papers and I'll put in like in our submission for like the Tumblr post, like the sources that I used, but there were just things like if a man, like it's not even in Islam, but in early modern England, if a man suspected his wife of cheating, he'd just say, I think my wife is cheating. I gotta kill her. They'd be like, okay, kill your wife. Done.
Damn.
No. And if she was innocent, she was innocent, but
Hmm.
that's so sad, and, just demonizing women and
Hmm.
things like that was a big part of it too.
Of course. And it's so interesting that you kind of brought up this idea of like violence. In Othello, we see violence when he kills Desdemona, even as she's pleading for her life. Unfortunately, like really realistic for a lot of situations, like women are not saved by pleading. It's kind of that whole thing of like, oh, why didn't she leave him? Because a lot of times, like, they have no other thing to do, which I think is especially present in Othello. She's out there with him. He's about to go off and like fight in wars and stuff like that. Like, she has no home to go back to, especially after the fact that she like married him without her father's knowledge. Like I think that's so interesting where like we start seeing this like domestic abuse victim stereotypes kind of be foreshadowed in a lot of the play.
And I also find it interesting that you were saying that it was like her downfall that was brought, like it was a man that brought was her downfall, you know. But I mean, there's literally no other option. Like it had to be a man. It wasn't like women. I mean, obviously there were tensions between women; they would fight. But I mean, a woman couldn't really. She doesn't really have that power to take down another woman, you know, especially Desdemona. I mean, who else had that enough power like she did? You know, there aren't even women in power in this play, really.
Even back in England, like a man thought a woman was cheating on him, he could just kill her. I think there's something to say about how that's still present in like even our Western society. I think about how like when people murder their spouses, a lot of time they get this like they get like ears off their sentence if it's managed to like say that it was a crime of passion, you know? Like that somehow excuses or oh yeah, he killed his wife, but it was out of love, like it was out of intense emotion. Like what the fuck? Like what about the intense emotion of the victim, you know? So that's like it definitely it's unfortunate that the dynamic shown in Othello still kind of holds true to today.
Yeah, and even, you know, just like people will say a lot of shooters is like, especially like, you know, white American shooters is they'll say, oh, like they had a bad day. Like they're mentally ill.
Mhm.
They need help. And then you're like, where is all this coming? Like, obviously, these people need help, but you don't apply that same sentiment towards people of color, women. Women are too emotional. That's
Or
a bad thing. But if men are too emotional, they need help.
exactly. And you know, when you said emotional, I had like bells ringing in my head because fuck, we could say the same thing about Iago.
Mhm.
Iago is so emotional over like he's so petty and I think it's crazy that you know even when we were having discussions in the classroom I felt like we dangerously got close to like excusing his actions at some point like oh well you know it makes sense because he's a military man like he feels he's been wronged like so that's why he did it but it's still like that's inexcusable like I can't make the jump from oh I didn't get the promotion I thought I deserved I'm gonna trick my boss into like murdering his wife.
It's just the entitlement. It's all just entitlement. That's what it is.
Yeah, and I feel like it really ties into a lot of like you know, a lot of masculinity issues, a lot of like emotional intelligence issues. And you know, it's amazing that this play that was like so many freaking like so long ago is still representing things that we're seeing too like every day. I think especially so in the US where we're having constant conversations about like shooters and about other people that like seemingly just have no other way to express their emotions besides harming others, which is something that you brought up that I thought was super interesting.
And I also kind of just want to ask you a question about Othello's suicide. Do you think that strengthened or weakened his heroism? I know it's kind of random. We kind of just went off on a tangent. I just kind of want to bring it back.
Of course. You know, it's so interesting because I think about that and you know, immediately my mind jumps to all the other fucking suicides that Shakespeare has had. So I know you're a nursing major, so you might not have had as much of an experience as I have, unfortunately, because oh my god, the amount of Shakespeare I've like looked at. But it kind of brings me to the idea of like Ophelia from Hamlet and how like, you know, it's kind of ambiguous whether or not she kills herself and I remember that like I've written about that previously and I said, you know, in her situation like suicide strengthened her character because it was like the only choice throughout the entire play that she's able to make for herself. With Othello, this kind of like inverts that because all he's done is make choices, bad
Yeah.
choices, but like all he's done is choices. So his suicide, I feel like it's a coward like not a cowardly way out not suicide in general of course but I definitely think there is something to be said about how this is his way of like retaining whatever honor he has left, you know? What do you think about it?
I mean, it's just hard, you know, like I mean, just coming from like where we're like, we're 21st century, suicide is like such a big part of like, sadly, so many young people, do it. So it's hard to think of, suicide strengthening or weakening somebody's character, but in like, we have to think of like the context of a play, what does this do for the character? But, I mean, I don't know what it does for Othello's character because what is he trying to achieve at that point? Is it like the guilt of like just killing an innocent woman? Because then I would say that would weaken his heroism. If he was truly a hero, he would like obviously just,
Mhm.
bring justice, like,
Of
you
course.
know, like put Iago on trial, and
Go through with the punishment himself, I think too, you know?
definitely punish himself for sure, punish himself. But it's yeah, definitely. He's like, "Oh, I killed my wife. I feel so terrible. Let me like, I don't know."
Definitely.
Yeah.
And adding on to that, I feel like this was kind of discussed in our class, but I don't think he kills himself because he feels bad about Desdemona.
Mm.
I think he kills himself because his like otherwise he thinks his manhood would be like challenged if he didn't, like he thinks that, oh, like by killing myself that's the only honorable way out. But the honor isn't for Desdemona, pobrecita, who's already dead. It'd be for him.
Yeah.
So I feel like that's kind of where like his suicide explicitly in this play, I think, just shows how Othello is heroic in some ways, but how he's still a very faulted character and definitely still a man of his time, regardless of other aspects that have influenced him, such as his upbringing as a Moor and his like skin color, stuff like that. So yeah, no, that's a definitely good question, and I feel like it depends on whether it depends, I think, on how much accountability
Yeah.
you're holding him to.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, obviously he was manipulated, no question, but it's still, I feel like still up to the individual to like make those choices. And I feel like just the nature of their relationship, there wasn't a lot of trust. I feel like like even the father was like, "Hey, you better watch out for this one." And I feel like that was like, putting seeds in his head, you know.
Hmm.
But yeah.
And I think that's also kind of like something that I like to discuss based off like something that's definitely a running theme through Othello and such an important topic, but this idea of, what does it mean to be like a black man wed to a white woman? And it's weird because it's like, I have no idea of any of that perspective. I'm not about to say that I know what any of that feels like, but I definitely think that, like, even nowadays, there's not a lot of representation of that dynamic. I'm
Mhm.
like trying, like, the moment you mentioned it in the beginning minutes, I was like trying to come up with like five famous interracial couples and like
You can't think like them.
yeah,
I
I
mean,
can't think of any.
what's it? Megan and Harry is Megan and Harry
Meghan Markle.
reverse dynamic.
No, not Meghan Markle. Yeah, like
Look what happened to her. Still, they're trying. They're out for her.
exactly. And that's like definitely, and I can't even imagine that dynamic because you have the roles reversed, so it's just like not only is she a woman of color, but she's also a woman, which is like one aspect that Othello didn't have to deal with.
Mhm.
But
Yeah,
yeah, like I can't think of any like famous interracial representation in media, not in books, not in movies. Um, so it's kind of just like even compared to nowadays, Othello would be
yeah,
pretty unusual as
yeah.
far as like the type of relationships we usually see.
Definitely. And I feel like even just people like obviously everybody's like a little mix of everything. I mean colonialism and all that, but but
Small
just
colonialism.
yeah. But yeah, there's not a lot of like mixed race, like you were saying, even in like our society. I mean, people tend to like stick with their own, and I mean, it's just a reality. I mean, it's unfortunate because I mean, definitely cultures vary, and those things also have an impact, and it's just personal preference too. So, but yeah, it's just
Hmm.
I know definitely like biracial marriages. A big part of why it was condemned was because they didn't want to have mixed race children.
Hmm.
Even to this day, people are uncomfortable with that. And yeah.
Of course. And I wonder if that's like something that even Shakespeare didn't really want to deal with. Because you think about like their relationship, um, I'm trying to like get the timeline in my head, but they literally got married and then like what, a week later, Desdemona was murdered, if
Yeah.
we're going by like the time. So it's just like, is that not insane? Like, what messages does that like relay on to the public, that everything's happening? And of course it's a play, but
Mhm,
even with plays, a lot of times you'll see like huge time jumps. So it's
mhm.
kind of just like, what does this choice by Shakespeare to have her death follow so closely their union mean? And like what might he be inferring or wanting to kind of like ease the public into seeing?
Yeah, I definitely wonder what like I mean, obviously, it's not like he was like an ally by any means,
Of course.
but he's definitely bringing up questions about like how people saw Moors, how they saw Black people. And also, it's important to note that during this time in history, people were worried about an invasion,
Hmm.
by the Ottoman Empire and things like that. So people were scared, they're like, oh, these Moors are going to come and take over our great Christian society.
Hmm.
And then here you have a Black Moor who's in a position of power, so you can definitely see some correlations there.
Yeah, and I wonder like even going around the theme of like sex in Othello, I don't think there's any of that. Like like we just finished discussing, what was that play? Like Taming of the Shrew.
Mhm.
And they have entire portions of the play where the two main characters are kind of like going back and forth with like sexual innuendos and
Yeah.
comments like that. And it's like sexuality, yes, it's limited to the man because Catherine doesn't really like, understand what he's saying, or maybe she does, but she's just not giving him the benefit of seeing her reaction.
Mhm.
But I feel like the fact that like there's no sexuality whatsoever in Othello, at least none that I can like recall, is I don't know. I feel like that in itself is a statement. Like that's a choice.
Yeah, I mean, definitely. I didn't even really think about the lack of sexual innuendos between the two. But
Hmm.
I think it was definitely inferred that they did have like interactions just by like what Iago was saying. And Iago was saying some really racist things. Like he just kept making remarks
Hmm.
to like their union. And like when he was describing, he was talking about animals. He would call her a ewe, he would call her like a lamb, like things like that. And just, yeah. And during that time, I feel like obviously it wasn't very common, like for a relationship to happen between a white woman and a Black man. But once that happened, the woman would be deemed like sullied. Like I believe even in this play, it was like Othello was saying how she was now sullied. You
Hmm.
know, like by his Black face. So even Othello has that realization, like, oh, I just corrupted this woman.
Of course. And just going off of that, I retract on my previous statement because I feel like sex is definitely present in Othello, but like I would say that it's a motivation behind why Othello kills Desdemona, like recalling that this entire thing happens because he thinks that she's cheating on him with Cassio.
Mhm.
And there's that whole thing where he like finds the handkerchief and you know there's kind of like an assumption that we can have that they've been like, oh, like have they been sleeping around, even though we know they have not. It's just Iago saying that they're sleeping around. But yeah, like definitely to what you were going to, I feel like the fact that there's no definite sexual, like, I don't know,
Chin or nothing.
yeah, between Othello and Desdemona, besides like the negative remarks by Iago. And like, I keep going back to Hamlet because I am literally obsessed with that play. But even like Hamlet when he is depressed out of his fucking mind and trying to like get revenge for his ghost dad, which I'm explaining it so much more metal than it actually is. But he has like sexual comments that he makes towards Ophelia, and I feel like they're probably present across everything. The only play that I'm blanking on is like King Lear,
Mm.
where I don't think there's any adherence.
I really hope not. Just just the things they were saying about their own father is enough for me. Thank you very much.
Of course, especially when Cordelia's like, "Y'all weird. God, I like you like a dad, but that's about it."
Bringing it back to Trump and him saying nasty things about his own daughters.
Gross. Oh my god. Yeah, honestly, can we talk about that could be an entire podcast just being like, this is how Trump relates to Shakespeare.
It'd
Um,
be a great one.
I know, look out for the next episode, Anais. We'll see how this one's received. But yeah, no, but like as far as like sexual actions between Desdemona and Othello, I can't think of anything. Like did they even have sex? You know, I'm like one Google away from this.
Yeah.
Because I feel like that impacts the rest of the story.
And it was all like behind closed doors, and especially the timeline. You said it's literally just a week, and most of that week it was Othello thinking Desdemona cheated on him. So obviously they wouldn't have any other sexual interactions besides that one night before they even left.
Mhm.
And we don't really see that. We just see like um Iago talking to Brabantio, like, "Hey, your daughter's been stolen." Like we don't even see any of it really.
Of course, and you know, even when we were saying like bits and pieces of the movie with like Lawrence Fishburne in it, I didn't notice like there was no sexual tension between him and Desdemona. If anything, I would call it like they were he was being very cold to her, but they were definitely not like, you know, lovey-dovey.
Mm-hmm.
Which of course, yeah, you know, there's the times you can't really like, you know, stuff like that, but I definitely think that's something that's like very interesting and maybe might not be explored enough, but you know, how do they interact with each other? Like how do they physically interact with each other? Because you're thinking about like, you know, the Shakespeare play. There's not a lot of instruction, if any, on like how the actors are supposed to like interact with each other.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I feel like that adds another component to Othello, like, you know, from the first scenes to the last scenes, like how much physical interaction do they have with one another?
I think it's definitely also it might be an age thing because he was considerably older than her. She's just like a young, impressionable girl. But I mean, when I imagine their relationship, it kind of seems like a father daughter. Like I hate to say it, but it's like just like that. Like she respects him, she loves him, but there's like again no sexual tension. They're not like, oh my god, I love you, and like no sonnets and poems or things like that. It's just like, and even Othello himself, it was just, I love that she pitied me,
Mm,
you know? So I think just the nature of the relationship, it wasn't like what we see in Much Ado or any of those,
mhm.
Beth and his wife.
Yeah, and you know, even relating it to other plays, like where are the fucking healthy relationships? You know, is that a crazy question to ask? Because Taming of the Shrew, I hated it. I hated it so much.
It hurt. It really hurt.
It hurt so much, especially because all I could think was like, I bet you Catherine's gay. I bet you anything you want, this woman's gay. Like, I'm gonna just say it, you know. Um,
I can
even
see
with
that.
yeah, I could see it. Even with Beatrice from Mucho Ado About Nothing. Because it's like canon that Shakespeare has like you know, there's a lot of how on Shakespeare being bisexual
Mhm.
because he has plays where he kind of describes like, you know, sex between two men and it's kind of just like, oh, he was an artist, it doesn't relate to him. But honestly,
There were definitely gay people have been around.
yeah,
Yeah.
gay people have existed and I'm sorry, but have you guys seen pictures of him with the little earring? If I'm just saying, if that's not queer coding, I don't know what is, you know.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely like but as far as like heterosexual relationships, I don't think there's a single healthy one that I can think of.
I mean, Beatrice's relationship towards the end, maybe. I mean, obviously they fight a lot, but I mean, but also, I mean, it's we have to think of it like the context of the time.
Mhm.
You know, unfortunately, that's just how it was. I mean,
Yeah. Maybe the closest we get is like Macbeth. No, not Macbeth. Macduff and Lady Macduff.
like he even abandons her, and she curses him. So even
Anais is like, actually.
well, it's just yeah. And then he like goes off on like, oh my poor wife and child, they were killed, and like where were you? Like,
Yeah. Okay, calling out the deadbeats of Shakespeare. Oh, yeah, because I keep like thinking, because I'm trying to see if there's any like parallel to Othello and Desdemona. And unfortunately there are too many parallels. Like I'm connecting him to like the main couple from Taming of the Shrew, and once again it's like this man trying to like reconcile or trying to like maintain power over their significant other.
mhm,
And I feel like that's kind of a dynamic that is present enough in Shakespeare to kind of like warrant more critical analysis,
yeah.
Like,
Women were definitely seen as something to conquer. You know, they weren't seen as like human beings. Even in Othello, you know, when he was about to kill Desdemona, he was saying how he was gonna kill her. He didn't want to like stab her, do anything violent because he didn't want to damage her porcelain skin. You know, it was like yeah, it's like he would rather preserve her beauty than her life. You know.
mm, mhm.
So it's just things like, and same thing with Taming of the Shrew. He wanted to break her, you know. So
Of course, like there's this obsession with, I think, women in relation to what they can give you or how you believe they need to serve you, whereas like women themselves being alive is not a valid enough reason, you
yeah,
know? Yeah, that's so unfortunate. And especially with like, you mentioned how you saw Desdemona and Othello as like a father-daughter relationship. I saw it as like a mentor-mentee
yeah,
relationship. And
mhm,
it sucks because in the beginning of the play, I was like, yeah, I was just like, I don't think you guys are love. But I was definitely like, here's this older man who he seems mature, and here's this young girl who wants to explore the world. And we've talked about how in the beginning there's like almost an equal power dynamic. Like she wants to be there, she seeks him out, and she is doing it in part because of like her own desires. But definitely, like as the play keeps developing, we see that power dynamic go horrible. And once again, it kind of mirrors that breaking of the spirit that
mhm.
Catherine from Taming of the Shrew has, where like at one point the women are like, like I don't know what to do anymore. Like I just don't want this to continue.
Thy husband is thy lord, or I even saying it, I'm like, oh,
Ugh.
but yeah, that's how it was. And I feel like the only important, and I might be totally wrong, but
Huh.
from what I'm getting from this time period, is that women were only good for giving birth to sons and looking pretty, you
Of
know,
course.
pleasing their husband, like honoring their father, and that was it. They didn't live for themselves.
Of course. And that's so fucking annoying because like yeah, this whole idea that they are only as valuable um depending on their relationship with the men in their lives. And I feel like that's constant. Like I think every play we've discussed, whether it's King Lear and his daughters, whether it's Mucho Ado, where it's kind of like, hero
Mm.
literally has to pretend like she's dead for
Her
her to get
father
pity.
beat her at her own wedding.
That scene, I wanted to like be like, men are trash. I cannot. You know how much that hurt me? I love that actor. He's from like Dead Poet Society, and I was like, that's my man. And then I see him at the wedding scene, and I'm like, I am disgusted. I refuse.
And instead of defending his daughter's honor, he's like, "What did he do? Like, were you holding it up with somebody else?" Like,
Exactly.
man,
I know, and it's like this constant like humiliation, and every single Shakespeare one, whether it's like hero getting beat up by her fiance and her dad at her wedding, or whether it's Ophelia going crazy in Hamlet, or Catherine in Taming of the Shrew having to like be humiliated the entire play. And even with Desdemona, where she gets slapped right in front of her cousin.
yeah.
Yeah, stuff like that. So it's kind of just like, fuck, like, is this a statement about like, womanhood and like humiliation? Like, why aren't they allowed to be separated? And another thing is that, no offense, but behind this humiliation, it's the same male figures that demand them to like be upstanding, Yeah, like I don't know, do you make anything about that? Like do you think that we've gotten past that now with femininity, or do you think it's still there?
Oh no, it's still there, just different forms, And I was actually watching this video, and they were saying that men, they just people in general, we have like a part in our brains that helps us distinguish between like this is a person, this is a living being with thoughts and feelings, and
Mhm.
then so it's like, is this a person or is this just an object, right? So they had this study of these men, right? These really sexist men. So it's not all men, but these like men that were showing these tendencies and habits of catcalling, saying sexist things.
Of course.
And so they were showing pictures of women, dressed properly, or like, properly, wasn't very revealing. And they're like, okay, that the brain, the power of their brain, that's a person. But then they had another image of a woman just like in a maybe tank top and shorts, not nothing too provocative. But then that brain didn't fire, they really saw those women as objects, so it's not, it's it's still there. And you still have those men saying, or even unfortunately women saying, oh, what were you wearing?
Mhm.
Why were you out this late? Why didn't you have somebody with you? Why didn't you do this? Why didn't you do that? Women are still being put down for the actions of men. That accountability, we don't see it. We didn't see it in Othello, and we don't see it today.
Of course. And that's, oh my god, that's like scary. Like that that's the reality. And but it's still kind of like unfortunate, I guess, and it's kind of just like the extent to which this causes harm towards women is unimaginable, because it's not just those men being dicks to their girlfriends, it's not just that. Even if it were that, that would suck, but like the fact that, they go on to vote, and, if they see women as objects, women don't deserve proper health care, or they don't deserve like, you know, birth control, or all women are over emotional, so I don't have to take them seriously at my job, like it just keeps snowballing into patriarchy that we see today.
Yeah.
And definitely what you were kind of touching upon, where it's like in Othello, I think the entire statue monologue echoes what you said. The moment that Desdemona no longer serves him, or at least that he thinks that she doesn't serve him, she becomes an object.
Mhm.
Like that speech is literally so disgusting for me. I know that like, there's a lot to be said about, something can be beautifully written, but it can still like be atrocious. I always think about that when I'm thinking about male poets, because 90% of them are beautiful lyricists, but they
Yeah.
suck. So yeah, definitely like just drawing that back, the statue speech.
Mm. And definitely when Othello was saying he had to do this for himself and for the sake of other men.
Oh,
Like he did it, Desdemona did it to him, she will do it to other men, and he has to protect them. And you see that today. You see it with the shooting of that man
mhm.
who killed a bunch of Asian women. was saying that he was tempted by them, and it was their fault. And and he saw it as a way to like save other men too,
Of
so
course.
still like toxic masculinity, I guess, and like that toxic brotherhood where men don't hold other men accountable for their actions because they're like, oh, that's my brother, I might not agree with what he's saying, but he's still my brother.
Of course. And like even bringing up like toxic brotherhood, kind of what you touched upon. I feel like Taming of the Shrew is 90% of that. Mucho Ado, where the guys are kind of, like they partner up against the women.
Yeah.
I don't like all these times, like it's always like they're always the downfall because they're trying to get at other men, and then women are just the collateral damage,
Mhm.
you
Right.
know? And it's like, I don't know if you're too familiar with comic books or anything, but there's like this trope called the
Mhm.
woman in the fridge. And it's because,
Okay.
yeah, I know, right? No, there's this comic. I hope I'm getting it right. There's this comic, blah blah blah, way back then, where it was like Superman and his girlfriend gets murdered, chopped up into little pieces, and put in the fridge for his character development.
Oh.
And it's like, it's so common because it happens so often, especially with like superheroes and heroic figures, like we saw that with Spider-Man and Mary Jane. We see that with like Deadpool and his wife. Like it's like this constant thing where women become martyrs for the man.
Mhm.
And I think that that's even like probably some of the earliest showings of that are Hamlet, where Ophelia dies for Hamlet to realize that he's being an idiot.
Mhm.
And unfortunately, I feel like that's definitely kind of like, instead of the woman in the fridge, it's Desdemona in her bed, like in her wedding bed, being murdered. So Othello can develop into redeeming himself and realizing the errors of his way. Like, why does it take a woman suffering for that?
Yeah, maybe so they can, I don't know, feel better, not feel better about themselves, but be like, like, oh, I brought justice to this woman. I did this for her in her late memory. It's honorable, to save the damsel in distress. Maybe. I don't know.
I know, but the damsel dies. Like, who are you
Yeah.
saving?
You didn't do much. Didn't work out, obviously.
Yeah, and it's just like,
Oh,
period. I love how Miss Sweeney is going for coffee. Me
yeah,
too.
her coffee addiction. Love it. I can understand it.
I
Um,
know. You know what? Me too. Although they didn't put sugar in my coffee. So I was gonna cry as I was driving away, and then I was like, I'm already late. So I just had to keep driving. Um but yeah, like uh, it there's just so much frustrations with
def-
it, and Desdemona, I feel like if anything, she's the heroic figure in this. Not Othello. He's okay, I guess, by the end.
Mhm.
But when you think about Desdemona, like she gets wronged.
Mhm.
She
She
gets
still loves him.
she still loves him. Like she's still on her dying breath says, it was someone else that killed me, dies.
And I don't know if you remember in the movie when she was like caressing his face
Oh,
as she was dying. And I'm like, what is that?
yeah.
Why are you still forgiving him and giving him that affection? Like that would make him feel better. She was like trying to like make him feel better as he was killing her.
Oh my god. Anais, that could not be me. If I'm being murdered, I don't care who it is. It could be Chris Evans, and I would curse him out. I would,
Curse him,
I
taunt him.
scratch him in my dying breath. I'd be like, check underneath my fingernails, like, but like, oh my god, and they're horrible because it's like of course, it's you have to separate the reality of, a domestic abuse victim goes into Stockholm syndrome, and she or they has no other way, and in some cases they truly do love their abusers, or they've been abused to the point where that's how it's a survival method, which is something we talked about with Desdemona as well. Like, all of these actions, they're her survival methods, I would say, for a large portion of it. But in that last scene where she's literally dying, she's not going to survive.
Mhm.
It's like, wow, even in that last dying breath, she still loves him. She's
Yeah,
still trying to spare him.
yeah. And I wonder why, because I would question her love for him,
Hmm.
throughout the whole play, and I was like, do you really love the man, or did you love who he was? I mean, he was in a position of power. He was different. He was older, more mature, but like, did you really love him for him? That's like a cliche thing we have now, but back then, I mean, I wonder if that love was real. And then you look at the scene, and she's just being so selfless for
Hmm.
example. So you gotta kind of wonder what that says about her love for him. Maybe not his love for her. I don't know if he did love her, considering he killed her. But mm,
And I feel like that's another important thing I wanted to touch about in Othello as we wind down our conversation. But I know towards the end of the class, we had our professor asked, like, do we think that Othello loved Desdemona? I don't think he did. I will stand by that fact that throughout the entire play, I don't think he ever loves her. I think he is infatuated with her. I think he's obsessed with her. I think that he is lustful for her. I
mhm.
don't think he ever loves her. What do you think?
Yeah, I don't think he loved her either. I think, yeah, there's just some like respect that goes into every relationship, regardless of the time period, you know. And I think just from the start, like maybe she truly loved him, but he didn't love her. He loved, like, she had a good reputation. She came from a good family.
Mhm.
She was young and pretty, and everybody wanted her. So he was like, oh, I must be so worthy of her love.
Mhm.
But yeah, and I don't know. And even at the end, I have to find the quote and put it in. But even when she would refer to her love for Othello as sins, and he, I don't know, he probably thought she was like a whore, right? Because she thought she was cheating on him with Cassio. But like you said with the timeline, again, it didn't take that long.
Mhm.
It didn't. So he must not have had such a high image of her, if that's all it took was a couple words from Iago.
Mhm. Yeah, and I definitely think that even if you want to like excuse his actions and be like, "Oh, well, um he did it because he loved her so much, or blah blah blah, or he thought so lowly of himself. Of course he would think she was cheating on him with Cassio." I cannot for the life of me find any excuse to murder a significant other. Like, to murder anyone, obviously, but like definitely not someone that, you know, you've married for whatever reason, that you've especially with the time that we're in, that you've uprooted from their life beforehand. You know, the moment
Mm,
she marries him, like, that's it. She's gonna depend on you for a home. She's gonna depend on you for like food, blah blah blah. Women during this time don't have a job, don't have like even a semblance of self,
mhm.
according to most places.
Everything they have is their husband's. They lose everything when they get married.
Of course, and they are their husband's property for, like, if you want to be technical about, situations of power in their relationships. So it's just like, I cannot come up with any. I don't think I have sympathy for him. Like,
No.
how do you how do you murder someone, but how do you like murder someone that is literally like telling you they love you?
Mhm.
She begs for it, like she begs, like, "What, kill me tomorrow."
Yeah.
Like, I was like crying when I read that line. I was like, damn, this is how much of a horrible person do you have to be to deny someone even that, you know?
Definitely. And unfortunately, you still see it today,
Mhm.
like, women are still killed. And, it's just women go missing. And it's still an occurring thing we see today. And it's their families, like you said, it's their significant others that do these things to them. And you wonder, is like pride and honor that important to you?
Mhm.
How do you get to that point where you're like, my love isn't enough. Like I need to do what's right by my family. I have to do the honorable thing and kill this person who I say I love, you know.
Mhm.
Yeah, but no sympathy. No
Yeah,
sympathy
no
for that
sympathy.
fellow.
I know. I want a Desdemona t-shirt that like just says Desdemona should have lived first of all. And you know what? Replace Othello's name out of the story. Just
He
kill it.
can he can still commit suicide.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Mona can live on.
Of course. And it sucks because every time that we like read one of these plays, there's a part of me that's like, yes, I appreciate the craftsmanship. I appreciate the concept of Shakespeare, like this idea that this man was able to write so well and so articulately that he shaped the world of modern English as we know it. But there's always a part of me that wants more for the women characters, you know?
And I feel like, especially since we're still talking about it today, like right now we're talking about
Yeah.
it, and it's not any different, we still have the same problems. We're still talking about the same things. It may look different, but it's at the core of it, it's all the same. And I think that's why, we're talking about how Professor Sweeney wanted to make this a multicultural class, and you could totally do it.
Yeah,
No, we talk about a lot of things. You just have to know what you're talking about.
of course. And like I think even adding into like how do you talk about Othello in the modern classroom? I think it's there. I think one thing you have to do is just not be afraid of hearing other people.
Yeah.
Because it's like if you want to talk about race in Shakespeare, you can do that. If you want to talk about religious differences in Shakespeare, there's that. If you want to talk about feminism, domestic abuse and other issues that have to do like with women and their treatment by society, you can do that. But of course, like, and this is kind of one of my things with like the fucking public education system, but I think we do not invite kids to voice their opinions. Like we do not allow for there to be gray areas in morality. We don't talk about these hard topics, and then that's what I think makes them even harder later on when those kids aren't kids and they're adults or they're teenagers.
Yeah, definitely. Like where I was raised, I was like, there were maybe a handful of Hispanic kids, 3 to 4 Black kids, and it was just predominantly white. And in every English class, we didn't talk about race. We rarely talked about gender. That was like one of the first, like when I first came to college, everybody was talking about these big things, and obviously we would talk about it at home, and we'd see the news, like we'd stay updated. But a lot of, like you were saying, the education system, they just don't want to talk about those things. It's uncomfortable, definitely. Even talking about it now, I mean, it's still a little, it's different, but I feel like especially in this class we talked a lot about gender especially, and I think that's really important, and I'm glad that we do have some of the our male peers here that they can see, like, from our perspective, coming like most of our class is female,
Of
but
course.
yeah, it's important that, we all talk to each other about these things, because it's hundreds of years, nothing has gotten done. And it's because we don't talk about it, like it's cliche to say, but definitely need to talk about it more.
Of course. And like that line of like, people don't want to ruffle each other's feathers. Like I think, what, get ruffled. Like I've been in so many classes where like you know, I might not like it might not be something like that. someone will say something and I'll be like, like I'm like, ooh, ooh, okay. Um, but that's important. Like you have to expose one another to like different ideas. You have to, I think, help students especially become comfortable in voicing their opinions. And I feel like the problem with why people think Shakespeare is outdated is because they're just teaching it at face value. You
Yeah.
know, they're just like, this is Shakespeare, this is this play, this is what happens, blah, blah, blah. But in
It's
reality, what should happen is this is Shakespeare, this is what happened. Now let's talk about the like sexism in it.
mm. Let's talk about these racist remarks.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. It's like you just learn about Romeo and Juliet. That's it. Tragic lovers.
Personally, I think they could have solved their situation differently, but I think they could have just not killed themselves. But yeah, no, definitely like it's just I think it says a lot that it just says a lot that Shakespeare has been seen as no longer being relevant, and I feel like that speaks less about like actual relevancy and more about the fact that people don't want to dig deeper into it. Thank you. I guess that's the wrap of our podcast.